I just can't wait to see how they spin this.
War wasn't always the American way.
I don't blame people for being skeptical of any FBI narrative.
We have a mass noticing going on. This presidential administration hasn't enacted the agenda it campaigned on.
If wars can be started by lies,
peace can be started by truth.
No more war, no more debt, no more inflation,
and no more empire.
We were told that real regime change has never been tried, that this regime change would be different. This decapitation strike against Iran would solve everything. It would alleviate us of a threat to the United States, supposedly. That's absurd, of course. That's the line we got, though. And now we're here, I think, 24 or 25 days into the Iran war, and there seems to be an impasse, but lots of rumors swirling about going up the escalatory ladder, whether it be through Marines being deployed into the region. Recent news that the 82nd Airborne may be deploying to the region, the taking of Karg Island. What's going to happen next? Meanwhile, we have Trump answering on the tarmac to reporters saying that we're in negotiations with a top guy in Iran of some sort, and Iran's maintained the posture that we don't want a ceasefire. We want to harm the United States. They deserve to be punished. But yet, is there a light at the end of the tunnel? I brought Dave DeCamp on to try to answer some of those questions, sift through the madness. And Dave's been on the program again in the past, I should say. He's the news editor at antiwar.com, and he runs the antiwar.com podcast, which goes out every single weeknight just about. And he does such a great job in reporting on these stories and U.S. foreign policy in general. So, Dave, just thanks for being back on Liberty Vault. I really appreciate you.
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much for having me back. I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, man. I just drop your name all the time because I think it's guys like you and Max Blumenthal and Kyle Anzalone who do some of the best reporting on this theater in particular, and really in all theaters of U.S. foreign policy. I think your reporting's spectacular. We're actually going to talk about a little bit of it in a second, but before we get into any of the clips, I want to break down and kind of get your insights on what's your general, like, overarching view of this war, where it's at, the propaganda, maybe how it shifted, where you think this could go, whether it's good or bad, or whether you see any like semblings of silver linings just based on U.S. posturing.
Yeah, well, I keep saying that, since this war started, even though it's been almost a month now, I still kind of can't believe it. I mean, even though I saw this coming, I expected it. I was pretty much of the opinion that a decision was made at Mar-a-Lago at the end of December when Netanyahu was there. Because if you remember in January, it looked like U.S. strikes were imminent, and then Trump backed down and started this big military buildup. And I think it was very clear that the negotiations were just to buy time for that military buildup. And it became much more clear in just a few weeks before when we started seeing Steve Witkoff go on the news and claim that Iran could build a nuclear weapon within a week. And this is the guy involved in the negotiations, just complete nonsense. And then J.D. Vance, the vice president, saying that, we have evidence that they're trying to rebuild their nuclear weapons. Well, Iran has never had nuclear weapons. And again, there's just no evidence. They're at the same time, Trump was saying all year that they obliterated Iran's nuclear program. The propaganda was just incredibly weak. It was very low effort war propaganda, a real insult to the intelligence of the American people, I think. But yeah, so once I saw that, I just expected this to happen, especially with the buildup, because a lot of people focus on the aircraft carriers, but basically from January to February 28th, when the war started, there was just a steady stream of U.S. military cargo aircraft and tankers just heading to the Middle East. And they're bringing in air defenses, munitions, things like that. So a decision was made, and it was all a ruse. And you talk about, the deception and just the lack of honor that our government has with this. This is the second time now that Iran has been attacked during negotiations with the U.S. It was, It was a Saturday, early Saturday morning, our time. It was later in the day in Iran, obviously, but that this war started with the U.S. and Israel bombing Iran, and it was Monday. There was supposed to be technical experts from Iran and the U.S. to meet to hammer out the details of a potential deal. You had Oman's foreign minister, who was brokering the negotiations, make what looked like an emergency trip to the U.S., and he actually met with J.D. Vance and went on some news networks saying that there's a deal on the table. Iran is willing to give up its nuclear enrichment material. And it looks like the reason why he did that was because Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner just had no idea. Either they had no idea what they were talking about when it came to the technical nuclear stuff, and that was very clear from the interviews that Witkoff was doing, or they were just kind of intentionally misunderstanding and lying. And I lean more toward that. So just very despicable how this whole thing happened, and the lying and the propaganda. And now it looks like this is what we feared would happen back in June 2025 when the U.S. bombed the Iranian nuclear plants. It was always the opinion including of the Pentagon, that if the U.S. bombed Iran would unleash its missiles and drones on U.S. bases in the region, potentially close the Strait of Hormuz, hit energy infrastructure in the Gulf Arab countries. And that didn't happen in that first war. And they decided to de-escalate. But this time it's all happened. And so, we're in a position now where, they killed the Ayatollah. Well, they killed Ayatollah Khamenei. Now we have a younger Ayatollah Khamenei who also lost his mother, sister, wife, and son in the same strike. So you think he's going to say, you know what, let's make another deal with the U.S. and, let's trust them now after all this. And Iran's military response hasn't slowed down at all. We've been seeing Iranian missiles make direct hits in Israel. So, there's just a lot of things to talk about, but just overall, it's just such a mess. And, if you want to get into these claims about talks and negotiations, we could talk about that, because unfortunately, I don't really see this ending anytime soon.
Yeah, I have to agree with that, just because the posture of Iran has been remarkably consistent. They've never, postured that they want a ceasefire and end to hostilities. It's like this time the U.S. has to pay, because we tried what we did last time, and you still had the U.S. and Israel knocking on their door again, right? That's exactly what you're getting at here. I wanted to ask you about this because I rarely talk about corporate news on this show, but I saw a New York Times article from 2 days ago that was actually kind of interesting. It said that the head of Mossad, I think a guy named Baria, had said that he had, it was talking about Baria had tried to convince and successfully convinced both the Trump administration and the Israeli government that if they launch a decapitation strike, it will be successful. The protesters will rally to the cause of the U.S., will be greeted as liberators, which contravened what the previous head of Mossad, a guy named Cohen, had said. Have you seen that article or any thoughts on that if you have?
Yeah. And I thought that was interesting because, something happened similar last time before the 12-day war when U.S. intelligence, because according to other reports, U.S. intelligence officials and agencies did not expect regime change or an uprising if a war like this was started. But then here you have the Mossad claiming that, or the head of the Mossad claiming that. And before the 12-day war, as Tulsi Gabbard said, it was the consensus of all U.S. intelligence agencies that there was no evidence Iran was building a nuclear weapon or trying to, or made the decision to pursue one. Yet John Ratcliffe, the head of the CIA, he made claims based on not CIA intelligence, but what the Mossad was telling him. So it could be a similar situation where they were just, giving them bad intel to justify the war. I don't think Israel really expected these things to happen. And especially the way that they've gone about it. As I said, the way that they kill these people, killing them with their entire families and everything. So, I think it was probably part of the effort to push the war, was to sell this idea that it would lead to an uprising. But obviously we didn't see that.
Yeah, we didn't see that at all. You even had Trump in his initial speech saying, Iranians, take control of your government now, as if like they anticipated that this was just on the cusp of reality. But it just behooves us to look through the lessons of the past that this never really happens. And why should it? Humanity is still the same, regardless of culture or country. It seems like if any other country took out the United States president, you'd have diehard Biden supporters supporting the Trump administration in an act of patriotic fervor to oppose it. And the same thing with vice versa. If any country had taken out Biden, that would be a rallying point even for MAGA conservatives to, join against and resist that. I think just the case for that is almost impossible to disrupt. But I do want to ask you too, you just wrote a really good article about a potential Karg Island expedition that might happen. At one point it was rumored that the United States would bring in, I think, something like 5,000 Marines who are heading into that theater, if not there already. But now there is word that the 82nd Airborne, I think typically stationed at Fort Bragg, is going to be summoned possibly for that or a different foray as a ground invasion force into Iran. So can you speak to that and what difficulties that might present?
Yeah, I mean, so it does appear, as insane as it sounds, it does appear that the Trump administration is seriously considering some sort of ground operations. And the things that are on the table are potentially seizing Karg Island, which is an island right off the coast of Iran where most of its oil exports go through. There's lots of oil infrastructure. But the thing is that it's very deep inside the Persian Gulf. So, they sent these 2 Marine expeditionary units are on their way to the region. And that consists of about 5,000 Marines, but they're on warships. They're in these amphibious ready groups. So I don't think they can really go through the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, if they do, they're going to take on significant Iranian missile and drone fire. And then the other thing that's being discussed, potential operations include trying to seize Iranian ports, along the Iranian coast. And I think, we keep hearing about Karg Island, but I do think that if we see some kind of ground ops, it's going to be something like that, maybe right at the Strait of Hormuz, trying to secure the coastline there. And then the other operation that they're discussing is potentially sending in a special operations team to secure the Iran stockpile of uranium that's enriched at 60%. But as I understand it, it's under a mountain, basically. It was buried in the rubble when the U.S. bunker buster bombs destroyed Iran's nuclear facilities. And, so I don't know how are they going to get that? I mean, that would take some time, some serious time. It's not like they could just go in and out. So I don't know if that's really realistic. So I kind of am leaning towards that. If they go ahead with this escalation, which again, to me, all signs are pointing in that direction, as just crazy as it seems, it's going to be something in this, near the Strait of Hormuz. And now there's reports that just today, the 82nd Airborne has been, one of their units, a brigade of about 3,000 troops has been deployed, gotten orders to deploy to the Middle East. And according to the New York Times, this is something, they're considering using them to take Karg Island or using them to help the Marines do it as part of that operation. So these things are seriously being discussed and considered. And I think, so the thing with that island, again, is its location. Maybe they could have success capturing the island, but can they hold it under this just constant, they're not going to have any real air defenses. I mean, it could be a slaughter of American troops if they try to do this. I mean, that's John Mearsheimer's calling it saying it could be like Gallipoli. Which is I just don't understand how they're really considering this. And they're thinking, okay, we go in there, take control of the Strait of Hormuz, take control of Karg Island, which again, what exactly would that do? Cripple their oil exports, which have actually gone up since the war started, by the way. Iran is now exporting more oil. They have essentially complete control of the Strait of Hormuz. But anyway, so the whole thing is just insanity, but they seem to be going ahead with it.
Yeah, sure seems so, man. It's just like we've reached a point where there's potential mission creep. It's setting up to be a debacle that I don't think Trump or Netanyahu fully anticipated, with this decapitation strike showing no signs of actually taking out the regime. The hereditary dynasty, essentially the Khamenei dynasty, is still in place. And like you alluded to, it's just a more radical son supreme leader this time, to many accounts. Do you buy those accounts that he was already more radical than his father before the U.S. took the supreme leader Ali Khamenei out?
I mean, I don't really know. I don't have the knowledge of him or Iran's internal system to say, but as I understand it, he has very close ties to the IRGC, which is essentially running the show now. You know, just today there was news that they replaced Ali Larijani, who is the head of the National Security Council. He was also killed last week, and he had a history of favoring diplomacy with the U.S. And now he's being replaced with the former deputy commander in chief of the IRGC, who does not feel that way. And that's typical with the IRGC. If you see what IRGC leadership, their rhetoric is always much, and this is going back before the war, much, much more hawkish than the government. And these guys, it's the military is essentially in charge now because they're the ones controlling the military response and everything. And they've pledged their loyalty to the new supreme leader, who has yet to make any public appearances. He's issued some statements, but with these high-level assassinations, the military response hasn't stopped.
Yeah, so some people actually assert that they think that guy is dead. He hasn't made any public appearances. You could explain that away. Obviously, his security is probably tightly controlled if he is alive, but my assertion's always been like, why would they name him the new supreme leader if he was really dead? If that was ever exposed, that'd be pretty disastrous. Do you have any take on, percent chances that he's not even alive?
I mean, that's kind of my take on it as well, that they wouldn't name someone who was dead just for the kind of PR factor if it is ever revealed. Yeah. So I think he's probably just hunkered down because they know that as soon as Israel gets, a whiff of him, they're going to try to kill him. So, we'll see if we see any kind of video addresses from him or anything like that, but they're probably worried that could give away the location.
Yeah. Yeah, certainly so. I had Anthony Aguilar on my show the other night. He's a decorated combat veteran, been deployed to basically every theater in the War on Terror, just like Joe Kent, who we'll talk about in a few minutes. And I think there's so many parallels between those two guys too in this. But he said that, it really, really would be catastrophic if any significant ground force tries to actually take the centers of power within Iran, just because of the terrain and everything you'd be dealing with in terms of advanced technology and weaponry that the U.S. has never faced in this war on terror, despite the debacles that it has faced in this war on terror, that nothing would be like Iran if that's the commitment. And yet that it makes me so concerned that not only would that be attempted, because the neocons and the Israel lobby and Benjamin Netanyahu want that more than anything. I think Netanyahu's actually made some comments like we might need boots on the ground here in the public. I think he said that. So I'm just very worried about this, not only for U.S. servicemen, but maybe that the Saudis or the Pakistanis or the Turks would be drawn into what would become a regional war and then risk potential use of nuclear weapons, like the absolute worst case scenario. Do you share the same concerns, even though we're obviously not seeing quite that yet?
Yeah. No, I think, it is a regional war. It became a regional war basically on day one. You don't have the Saudis or the UAE yet. I mean, they don't have, they have an air force. They could launch airstrikes, but I don't know what else they can really do much more than that at this current point. But I guess things could escalate with them getting more involved. But, you mentioned nuclear weapons, and yeah, I'm very concerned that this could lead to Israel using a nuclear weapon, especially with what we're seeing. The Iranians targeted Dimona, which is the city in southern Israel near the Dimona reactor, which is where Israel first developed nuclear weapons. And
who did they steal that technology from, by the way? I forgot.
Yeah, their greatest ally. Great. That's greatest ally behavior.
Yeah,
but when I see them hitting Dimona, it makes me nervous, man. I mean, because Israel, it's left out of the conversation a lot, especially when they're making all sorts of claims about Iran's nuclear program. The fact that Israel has nukes, they probably have a few hundred. And what we've seen them do in Gaza, I mean, would you put it past them to use one? And so a scenario where this drags on, and it was interesting, David Sachs, who is technically in the Trump administration, though he's not involved in any national security stuff. He's an AI and crypto czar. He said recently that, if this drags on, Israel could get seriously destroyed, and then they would contemplate using a nuclear weapon. And I think that's exactly right. And if they see, if there is some kind of attempt at a ground invasion that just turns into a disaster, and Israel's still getting hit by Iranian missiles and stuff, I wouldn't put it past them to use nuclear weapons, because this is Netanyahu's. One reason why this war is happening now is because Netanyahu reads the writing on the wall of the political situation in the U.S. He probably recognizes this is the last U.S. administration that's going to be as hardcore Zionist and pro-Israel as it is. So this was really his last shot. So if this fails, this is Israel could take that step. I think it's a very real, scary, but real possibility. If this turn, and I mean, this is just such a mess. Again, I said before, I can't believe, because it's all the things, Trump said, we were shocked that Iran started hitting the Arab countries. Like, what do you mean you were shocked? This is where all your bases are. Like, it really does seem to me like, I think Trump thought that Iran would capitulate in like a few days, couple weeks. And he's finding out they're not. And he's certainly not willing to do what would be necessary at the moment for some kind of peace deal, which I don't even know what those terms would be. But he would need to make a serious, genuine effort, and he would need to tell Netanyahu no, and that we have to stop. And I just don't see that in him. I see Trump kind of riding this into complete disaster, and the economic situation is just going to get worse. And that's what, just going back to the talks, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that was, Monday morning, like the news cycle was just insane. It was like Trump posted that, we've had talks. We're going to hold off on bombing their power plants. And he says, yeah, we're talking to a high level guy. Can't tell you his name. And then the Israelis got in on it, which makes me think that it's all just a psyop. Netanyahu put out a video saying, I spoke with Trump. He's talking about a potential deal. Israeli media said that Steve Witkoff was talking to the head of Iran's parliament, who went on Twitter like right after those reports came out and said, this is fake news. And then there's these reports that they're proposing talks between him and JD Vance, but Iran hasn't responded. Iran says, we've gotten messages, but we're going to, we don't want a ceasefire. We don't want negotiations because you bombed us during negotiations last time. So I think that, he did it early Monday morning. It was to juke the markets, and we saw the price of oil go down after Trump said there was negotiations, and it went back up slightly after Iran denied it. So it's just, but not quite as much as it went down, so like, I think that's the concern. I mean, we saw the energy secretary last week or 2 weeks ago just write on Twitter that a U.S. Navy warship escorted a tanker through the Strait of Hormuz, and that sent the price of oil down, but it just wasn't true. And I mean, I think he probably just lied, or was told that by somebody who was lying to put it out to try to, send the price of oil down for a little while until people realize that that's not true. And I think that's a major part of what Trump is saying publicly. I don't think we should really believe anything he says at this point.
Yeah, I think you really nailed the motivations behind Netanyahu. I think the way I put it is like it's a door in the distance that's gradually closing, because U.S. opinion is shifting so fiercely against Israel right now. And yet they have, the biggest pro-Israel guy in the Oval Office right now. They really see their door of opportunity for consummating the Greater Israel Project, or some variant of that, closing slowly. And I think that explains not only the behavior of Netanyahu, but also the Israel lobby and its top shills in the United States, like Laura Loomer and Ben Shapiro and Dave Rubin and Mark Levin and Ted Cruz, in how they're behaving and responding to this, that, people are being smeared in ways that they've never been smeared before. Now, there would be outliers like Pat Buchanan and Sam Perkins and Ron Paul, who would, deny wanting a stronger attachment to Israel. But you really see this on overload right now. And Dave Sachs is an interesting one. I always really liked Dave Sachs because he was so good on the Ukraine proxy war, calling that out, being very well knowledgeable and educated on that. He's now part of the administration, but even you see some people in the administration kind of talking about this a little bit differently. He didn't go all the way like Joe Kent did, resign. He's a crypto czar. He's not exactly in the intelligence apparatus, but military. But I think a lot of people are considering how these takes that are pro-Israel and pro-Iran war are going to age into the future. Dave Sachs might be smart enough to think in that direction. What do you think about that?
Yeah. Well, you mean like what could happen within the administration going forward?
Yeah, if this becomes, a deeper quagmire, spills in beyond the midterms, even if the Republicans have losses that they keep digging their heels in, it becomes a longer, protracted war. Do you think that people in the administration, even Tulsi Gabbard, we're going to talk about her too, might be thinking about this, especially if they have future political ambitions themselves?
Yeah, and I think that is a factor here, potentially, so Joe Kent, I mean, his resignation is a big deal. I mean, he's a high level official. We never saw resignations like that before. During the Iraq war, not at that level, or during the Biden administration, there were a lot of resignations over his support for the genocide in Gaza, but not at that high of a level. So it's very significant. And yeah, I would expect as this drags on, because I know that there's other people in the administration in higher level positions who have always been against going to war with Iran. So I would expect to see, I mean, we should see more resignations if they have a conscience going forward. I'm sure some of them might think they could try to do more good within the administration, but at this point, I don't know where, they're clearly not having any influence at the moment. So yeah, I think we're going to see more of that, and probably, hopefully, more dissent from Republicans within Congress. So far, there's barely been any, besides Thomas Massey, and I know Warren Davidson in the House voted for the War Powers Resolution, and Rand Paul. But I mean that's like it. I saw, what's her name, Lauren Boebert said she was against the $200 billion, which is just absurd. I mean, that's more than Biden spent on Ukraine, and they're already asking for $200 billion.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned, it could be, people could be resigning over, principled objections to this, but it could also be a political move because, the Republicans are going to get hammered in the midterms. And the big thing here is that the gas prices are going up. And that's the one thing, like, people who aren't political, who don't pay attention to this stuff, or even just vaguely aware that there's a war in the Middle East right now. What's the one thing that they notice and say, is the gas prices. And you remember those stickers after the Ukraine war and of Biden at the gas pump pointing to the price
hike. It's the Putin price hike, dude.
Yeah, that's what he was calling it. Yeah. But there was the stickers at the gas pumps with Biden pointing at the price that said, "I did that." So I'm sure we'll probably start seeing some of those with Trump popping up around the country.
Likely so.
It's just the one thing that people, your average person who doesn't follow this stuff really feels. I mean, you really feel that when gas goes up that much.
Yeah, man. I mean, I'm kind of Jekyll and Hyde on this whole topic, because part of me thinks that just Trump lying about trying to seek an end to this conflict, that we've almost resolved all of our aims in this war. He's kind of messaged that way a few times, even before yesterday or whatever, maybe is a good sign. But on the other hand, I think that just to launch this war that has no popularity, no real public support behind it, depending on the poll, it's something like 20 to 30% of the total populace supports this, is just a slap in the face to the electorate in a way that not even like George W. Bush was willing to do. Over half the country did support the war in Iraq, etc. And like that, it's almost like the other side of me is thinking that Trump is operating in what I call YOLO Zionism mode, where he already knows that the Republicans are going to have their butts handed to them in the midterms. And he's operating with that impression in mind that that's inevitable. So I might as well do this and sink this ship for Israel, choosing this cause above all others. I mean, it's really horrifying. Joe Kent did resign. You pointed that out. It's not totally unprecedented that someone at his level would resign over war, but I think that the last time that happened was in Vietnam. Like, Robert McNamara did resign. He's a supervillain as far as I'm concerned for kind of covering up the Gulf of Tonkin incident, but he did resign in, I think, 68 into the war at some point. That's a major thing, but we hadn't seen this at all in the war on terror in the modern era, this happening. And I just think it's really significant. And they're throwing everything against him like they did against Assange and Snowden for telling the truth about war crimes and the surveillance state, respectively. They're smearing him as an anti-Semite, saying he's weak. Donald Trump called this decorated combat veteran weak, and then dared to make fun of him for marrying too quickly when he had an affair when his wife was pregnant. It's so absurd. You can't make it up. I just want to show this clip and then have you respond to it, Dave, on Kent talking about the propaganda, especially relating to Iran's nuclear program. And then I just want your further thoughts on it.
Clear. There was no intelligence that showed an imminent threat. There was no intelligence that showed they were on the cusp of building a nuclear weapon. There was no intelligence, indeed, that showed they were trying to build a nuclear weapon. And nobody said, I've seen it, but you haven't. It exists, but you just haven't seen it. Did you ever hear anybody say there is intel that shows this?
I did not know, but I know how this works. I know the Israeli officials, some in intelligence, some in government, will come to U.S. government officials, and they will say all kinds of things that we know from our intelligence just simply isn't true. And they'll say, hey, I'm giving you a preview. It's not in intelligence channels yet, but here's what's going to happen. And that doesn't usually come to
wait a second. I mean, I thought that U.S. policymakers made their decisions on the basis of intelligence collected and or vetted by our intelligence. That's why we have intelligence agencies that soak up hundreds of billions a year. But you're saying that Israeli officials short-circuited the entire U.S. government and just went right to American policymakers and said, it doesn't matter what your country says, here's what we know. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, usually they're pretty slick, and
of course.
And they'll say, hey, this isn't in intelligence channels yet because it's going to take some time to get there. And here they're on the cusp of building a bomb. You know, they're going to, I don't know, you pick your topic. A lot of times they'll sample different things until they find what sticks. But in general, the narrative about, you know, they're going to do a preemptive attack, or really just they're going to build a nuclear weapon. And if we don't stop them now, they're going to build a nuclear weapon. And enrichment is the pathway to that. They're going to continue enriching at whatever percent. Enrichment became the narrative. And so that hung up and that short-circuited and really sabotaged the entire negotiations, because the Iranians basically said, like, we're not going to negotiate if the whole starting point is no enrichment.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of interesting things right there. There was actually news that they were willing to give up enrichment for 3 years and give the uranium to a third party for a while. But I think what Joe Kent said there really just gives away the game that they play, where you have Israeli intelligence overriding not only the will of the American people, but in some cases are intelligence agencies that might have a different interpretation, even if you go by Tulsi Gabbard's annual threat summary. So, Dave, what do you think about this? Thoughts on Joe Kent in general, and, you know, whether this explains what we're seeing today?
Yeah, well, that gets back to what I was saying before about in the lead up to the 12-day war, all the U.S. intelligence was saying there's no evidence. That's what the IAEA was saying as well. But then the Mossad made some claims, and that was repeated by John Ratcliffe, the director of the CIA. So this is how the game was played in the lead up to that war. The thing about this current, you know, and what he mentioned there about the enrichment is important. The fact that enrichment was conflated with having a nuclear weapon. And it was very clear that that was like the view that the whole Trump administration had, you know, even low enrichment at like 3%, you know, which is just, there's no way to make a bomb with that. But that was what they seemed to be basing the negotiations on. And as you said, they actually offered to suspend all uranium enrichment for 3 to 5 years, which would get us through the Trump administration, and then restart it under like a joint project with some of the Gulf Arab countries that would have like just the most oversight in the world at very low enrichment levels, just no path to it turning into a nuclear bomb. But even that wasn't good enough. And another thing that's just really shameful about the lead up to this war, is that I mentioned, you know, Steve Witkoff was making these claims, JD Vance was making all these claims, and then Trump was throwing things all over the place. Like, you couldn't follow the BS that he was spinning. You know who wasn't saying any of that stuff was Netanyahu and the Israelis. They did not make any claims like that Iran was about to build a nuclear weapon. So where did that come from? I mean, was that from the Israelis, or were they just, you know, lying on their own to the American people to justify this war? So, you know, that again, that's one of the reasons why I was just kind of so disgusted by this whole thing. But Kent, yeah, I mean, I think what Joe Kent has done is very, very heroic. He's going out on a big limb here doing this, and he's going to get it from all angles. You see, like, as you said, Democrats are, some of them are saying, oh, it's good that he resigned, but he's very anti-Semitic, blaming this on Israel. It's like, dude, come on. Like Trump himself, I remember in some interview he did about the 12-day war, he said, oh, and I bombed Iran. I did that for Israel. I did it for Israel. It's like, listen to what Trump says. And there's just no, I think sometimes Tucker is too generous with Trump, making it seem like he was tricked by the Israelis.
Totally agree.
Yeah, I think Trump happily went along with a lot of this. But the idea that it didn't influence this, isn't a major factor of why this war is happening is just absurd. The idea that that wasn't one of the, I really think it's kind of an alignment of Israel, Zionist interests and the U.S. military industrial complex. Trump wants a $1.5 trillion military budget. Well, how do you get there? Well, you use a whole bunch of really expensive military equipment. You ask for 200 billion more, and then you say, see, now we're getting close to that 1.5 trillion. Let's just ask for that next year. And you see he hosted, the executives of Lockheed Martin and stuff. And they're like, we're going to quadruple production and all that. So I think that's also a big motivating factor here, and something that people often overlook because it's just our government and this system has this, it's like really endemic corruption. It's so like kind of in your face. The fact that you have these generals retire and then they go work for Raytheon and then convince, or work for think tanks that are funded by the arms makers to try to justify new wars. And then we've seen in recent years starting with the first Trump administration, they come, it's generals that go over to the arms industry and then they go right into the Pentagon, at the high level. There's always been the revolving door of lower level officials, but like Biden, his Secretary of Defense literally came from the board of Raytheon. And then he oversaw this policy where we dumped tens of billions of dollars worth of weapons, including many Raytheon made, weapons into Ukraine. So, that stuff is always a factor, but obviously the Israeli influence in this administration, you have Jared Kushner, who shared his childhood bedroom with Benjamin Netanyahu once, was involved in these negotiations. I mean, what does he know about any of this? And same thing with Steve Witkoff, when the administration first came in and they had the Gaza ceasefire and there was some efforts toward a ceasefire in Ukraine, I tried to be hopeful that maybe we would see some better results from these guys. But, it's just been abysmal. And especially since Jared Kushner got involved. Because I remember it was in September 2024 when Israel did the pager attack in Lebanon and they killed Nasrallah. They really escalated against Hezbollah. Jared Kushner put out this really long post on X about how great this was, how, because people thought Hezbollah would have been able to put up a better fight, and they do on the ground, as we've seen recently. But he said, this is the opportunity to take out Hezbollah, completely take them out. Calling Hezbollah Iran's loaded gun, basically pointed at Israel. And he said the U.S. should not do anything to stop the Israelis. They should support them going all in, full escalation in Lebanon. And so I think that's his same view about Iran, that he sees, their allies and proxies have been weakened. This is the time to get them. So I don't think Jared Kushner ever wanted any kind of deal here. They want to take out the regime or sink, just tear apart the country, sink it into chaos so it can't pose any threat to Israel's designs in the region. That's clearly the goal here. So, this idea that Joe Kent is anti-Semitic for pointing it out is just ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. I think there are a lot of ramifications, Dave, for the results of that power struggle within the first Trump administration between the fixer, Jared Kushner, and Steve Bannon. I'm no fan of Bannon. I think he's vile. He was an Epstein PR guy, essentially, at one point, the disclosures show us. But he was more of a non-interventionist, was more of a populist, versus Jared Kushner's neocon Zionism to the brink, to the hilt, right? And I think the ramifications of that power struggle and the ascension of Kushner have had bad ramifications. Like you said, he's a real estate developer. He's there just to build the Gaza Riviera. That's what the quest is. And it's just, I think it was a foregone conclusion that his injection into this administration was a really bad thing for U.S. foreign policy. I do want to talk about Tulsi Gabbard, too, because Tulsi Gabbard is someone that just had congressional testimony where she didn't exactly go to the lengths that Joe Kent did by resigning, morally so, making the right call. And she did not say that Israel brought us into this war, quite the opposite. And that, I think comically, the biggest thing that she said that was so preposterous is in this clip. I want you to watch this and explain where you think she sits on this. Has she chosen the side of Trump? Is she mulling a possible resignation? Let's look at this, and then you respond.
The intelligence community assessed that Iran maintained the intention to rebuild and to continue to grow their nuclear enrichment capability.
Was it the assessment of the intelligence community that there was a, quote, imminent nuclear threat posed by the Iranian regime, yes or no?
Senator, the only person who can determine what is and is not an imminent threat is the president.
False. This is the worldwide threats hearing where you present to Congress national intelligence, timely, objective, and independent of political considerations. You've stated today that the intelligence community's assessment is that Iran's nuclear enrichment program was obliterated and that, quote, there had been no efforts since then to try to rebuild their enrichment capability. Was it the intelligence community's assessment that nevertheless, despite this obliteration, there was a, quote, imminent nuclear threat posed by the Iranian regime? Yes or no?
It is not the intelligence community's responsibility to determine what is and is not an imminent threat.
I mean, it's just so preposterous, Dave. When she was a congresswoman and Obama was president, she's saying that Syria isn't an imminent threat. And it's literally her job description to produce an annual threat summary, which shows which countries, relatively speaking, are threats and which are not. So isn't this preposterous? What do you make of this? Do you think there's a possibility she might resign, or has she just chosen the side of Colin Powell and George W. Bush and the Israel First Project?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting there that she doesn't say, yes, there was an imminent threat, and that she makes that kind of absurd claim that only the president can determine that. I mean, it's just absurd. But also, you know, I feel like if she was going to resign, I mean, the opportunity was after Kent or to do it with him or something like that. Because, you know, Tulsi, the year before she joined the Trump administration, she had, you know, she like joined the Republican Party. She had a political change, and she was also a regular guest on Fox News. And in that year, she was like very hawkish on Iran and stuff. So she's kind of flipped on this stuff before joining this administration. But it is really shameful. Like, you know, it's so funny that her tweets are still out there because I see people just randomly retweet them, her just railing into Trump about killing Soleimani and it's a no war with Iran. You know, no.
And in Venezuela, she was very much against that regime change attempt by Pompeo in 2019.
Yeah. Dude. And she, you know, like, I think it was like a month or two before the attack on Venezuela, she's like, oh, no longer do we pursue regime change. And like, she's still keeping up some of her old rhetoric. And it's just like, what? So, but again, she's very careful there. I mean, she's saying that thing that's just kind of ridiculous for the DNI to say. But she's also seems like she's being careful not to say, yes, there was an imminent nuclear threat. I mean, maybe it's just because she's under oath and she knows it's just you know, she can't just blatantly lie like that. Because, I mean, some of the stuff that we've seen from Trump in the White House, what's her name, Caroline Leavitt, at one point said, oh, Trump had a feeling that Iran was going to attack, so we attacked. It's just, you can't make this stuff up.
You can't, like, dude, no one would believe this as a movie or something, man. Same with like Epstein's life and the cover up involved in that. It's like, you can't convince people that it's real, but it's playing out in front of our eyes.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, she's part of it, you know, and she was part of it the first time, the first war with Iran and then Venezuela. So, you know, I don't know. I mean, I don't really see it happening. The fact that she's sitting there humiliating herself like that, it seems like she's all in. She's going down with the ship. And you also see guys like Elbridge Colby, who's the Pentagon's policy chief, and he's a China hawk. And I've been very critical of him because for a long time he said the U.S. should commit to going to war with China over Taiwan, which I think is just, insane because of the risk of nuclear war, obviously. But he was always like smarter than the other hawks, and his argument was that the U.S. should not be so involved in the Middle East and Ukraine and stuff.
Yeah.
And he's written a lot of the national security strategy stuff.
Yeah. The recent strategy document.
He was being grilled by Elizabeth Warren. And I forget exactly what she said, but it was like, she just made him look like an idiot. And again, this is Liz Warren.
How is that? Wait, what? I have to find this clip now.
Yeah, I wish I remember the question she asked him. She just made him look like a total fool. And that's the position Trump has put them in. And if they're going to stay loyal to him, this is what it's going to take. It's going to take you betraying your country, looking like an idiot, and just completely burning all of your respectability. So I think, I wouldn't be surprised if we see some more resignations. I hope we do, because I think they're a big deal. I think they could potentially make change happen. If we see a lot of people stepping down from high level positions. But I don't know. Tulsi seems like she's all in at this point.
Yeah, man, I think that's such a good nuanced analysis of this. I side with you completely. I had Aguilar here, and he is convinced that Tulsi Gabbard will resign. But I think that her testimony shows that she has, although not saying that Iran was a threat, not saying what exactly like Ben Shapiro or Laura Loomer would say, is carefully tap dancing while trying to kind of just defer all the responsibility to Trump. So even if she has future political ambitions, and I can't seem to think that this will be a successful way to set up her political future if she does, but she'll try to say, hey, I was operating under the capacity of my job and the commander-in-chief makes the decisions, which of course is only half true, I think. But I think that you analyzed that well. I do want to bring up something else. This is an argument that I've heard several people make, including Tucker. And by the way, we have the same opinion on Tucker being a little bit too easy on Trump and saying like he was just totally manipulated into this war, even though it takes a complicit actor in him to launch it as well. It's not to say that the Israel lobby isn't powerful, but I do think that he wants to try to frame things in a way that he still commands a lot of respectability among people that do support Trump, do follow Trump, even though they might have problems with this war. But another thing that he raised was this argument about the U.S. presence in the Middle East after whatever happens in this Iran war, and something that I really disagree with. He talked about this with Professor Zhang recently, who I'm not sure if you're aware of, but I want you to take a look at this clip. I'm totally skeptical of this narrative, but I want your thoughts on it because I think it's a really interesting question.
Constraint to Israel achieving the Greater Israel Project is actually not Iran, but America, because America guarantees the military safety and protection of the GCC, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, UAE, these nations. And so if Israel is become dominant, it's become the hegemon of the Middle East, it needs to figure out how to remove America from the equation. And quite honestly, this war has shown the limitations of American power. It's really annoyed the American people. The American people do not want this war, and American people don't even understand why America is in the Middle East. And so it's very possible that regardless of what happens in this war, America is forced to withdraw from the Middle East, in which case Israel is able to achieve its Greater Israel Project.
Okay, so Dave, I have no doubt that that's what some of the Israeli Zionists want, to eject the U.S. from the Middle East, but nothing about the Iran war is telling me that like this is some endpoint of the U.S. empire building in the Middle East, largely on behalf of Israel, but also for its own reasons. Are you skeptical of this as well, or do you kind of agree with that?
Yeah, no, I've heard that before, and I've been asked that before. That actually, I was on Jimmy Dore, and he asked me that, and I was on right after the professor there, and he said, "So the Israelis want to get the U.S. out of the Middle East, right?" And my answer was no, at least for now. As you said, I'm sure they have dreams of being a global superpower that controls the land from the Euphrates to the Nile. But the fact is, at the moment, and in the foreseeable future, they are very extremely, if not completely, reliant on U.S. military support for achieving, their goals of taking southern Lebanon, annexing the West Bank, even if it's, not officially, destroying Gaza, and especially fighting Iran. I mean, if the U.S. air defenses were not involved in this war, it would be much worse than it already is for Israel. And people might think, oh, we just, not that it's a small amount, we give them $3.8 billion a year. Yes, it's a lot of money, but they relatively speaking, it's not like their entire military budget. Though that number has increased a lot since October 7th.
Last 2 years,
I think it did make up like more than half of their wartime budget or something. But the Israeli military equipment, the planes and things that they have, air defenses, are either American made or produced jointly with the U.S., which means they need American contractors, spare parts, all sorts of support from the U.S. to sustain this stuff. So they very much need that. They don't like fighting on the ground. They don't want to face, Hezbollah on the ground. So they don't want the U.S. out of there. They don't want the U.S. to constrain them. I think there are worries that, and you see Netanyahu talk about this even, like that this arrangement could make them too reliant on the U.S. And if there is a change, they're definitely worried about that. But the idea that they want to kick the U.S. out of the region, I don't think is right. He mentions the Arab countries there. I mean, a lot of these Arab countries, especially Jordan and Egypt, are essentially bought off by the U.S. to be friendly with Israel.
Right.
The UAE, Bahrain, the Saudis were close before October 7th. They were very close to just forgetting about resolving the issue of the Israeli occupation of Palestine. So I think they very much want the U.S. to be in the region. But I do think that this could lead to this war really could be the first, start off a chain of events that does lead to a retreat of the U.S. empire and potential withdrawal from the region. I mean, I do think it could go that poorly, especially if it ends with Israel using nuclear weapons. I mean, who knows where things could go from there. This is like a potential cataclysmic event when it comes to the U.S. global empire.
Yeah, man, I hate to agree with you. And it's kind of like a mixed reaction on my face hearing that. It's like, on one hand, I want the U.S. to be completely out of the Middle East, empire building, entangling alliances in general, bring every single last U.S. troop home, close down all the foreign U.S. bases in foreign parts of the world. I want that, but not at the cost of, hundreds of thousands of potential U.S. lives and hundreds of thousands of innocents that would die through nuclear detonation and a nuclear winter to follow. It's just so horrifying to think about. I do hope that, reason is elevated above the madness and above the war regime. It never seems to be, but that is my hope. I do want to ask you two more questions, then we'll get you out of here. One is about Israel taking this opportunity, the war in Iran, to expand its borders, to invade southern Lebanon. And you have Smotrich talking about annexing southern Lebanon and bringing it into Israel. You follow this stuff way closer than me, so this is not like, I'm not being facetious, but is this really coincidental that they're doing this right now? Or is this because of the war in Iran that they think that maybe no one will talk about this as much, that they're doing these and settler raids in the West Bank too?
Yeah, I think this is very much part of the plan, part of the war, what's happening in Lebanon. I mean, they really escalated. So what we saw from November 2024 until very recently, there was a so-called ceasefire deal in place, but Israel never fully ended its occupation of southern Lebanon. They left at least 5 military outposts, and they launched almost daily airstrikes and other operations that violated the ceasefire. Hezbollah, they held their fire the entire time. They didn't fire at Israel once until this war started. They fired a few rockets that they said was a response to them killing the Ayatollah. And then that was the excuse that Israel used to really escalate. But this was the plan. They planned to escalate anyway. They were going to find a reason, I believe. And so you mentioned Smotrich. So Smotrich is the one who always just goes out and says it, says the thing. But today, something I think more significant happened. The Israeli defense minister basically ordered a full, said that they're going to occupy, the Israeli military is going to occupy Lebanon to the south of the Litani River. And I don't know if all of the people have been emptied, if it's been totally emptied of people, but they've ordered a full evacuation. They're trying to cleanse the Lebanese, both Christian and Muslim, from South Lebanon and take it over. I mean, it's very clear that that's what they're trying to do here. And in Lebanon, it's a total disaster. More than 1 million people in a country with a population of about 5.5 million. More than 1 million have been displaced. More than 1,000 have been killed just in these past few weeks, including over 100 children. So it's horrific what's happening there. So yeah, and they're, as you said, they're able to do this. There's not much attention on this because of the war with Iran, and also the settlers have just been on a total rampage. It's just horrific. And I think right now, because they're escalated in the north in Lebanon and they have this ongoing war with Iran, we have not seen any major escalations in Gaza, thankfully, but we have seen them cut off the aid again. Then they allowed some in, so it's at very low levels at the moment. And there still is regular Israeli attacks. A couple people might get killed each day or every other day or so. So and people are living in tents and in rubble. No reconstruction has happened. So it's a horrific situation, but we still haven't seen them completely break the deal and go on the, try to recapture or just completely take over Gaza. But I think that's a possibility, depending on how Israel is doing with everything else.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's just horrifying to watch this whole region just drenched in bloodshed, and it doesn't have to be our fight. It never had to be our fight. It was because of the empire builders, those that chose entangling alliances above the preferences of the electorate who don't want that. It's all just bankers and the Israel lobby and the military-industrial complex and big energy that want that, and our politicians are bought off. It's just a sad fact. I'll say the reality. I know my audience doesn't disagree with that. I hope that there's a route out of that, but we're not seeing one anytime soon, I fear. I do want to ask you this, because you are a foreign policy genius as far as I'm concerned. You're one of the best reporters, one of the best analysts of this stuff, but you also pay attention to how it impacts domestic policy. And really, I think where the American spirit and the American electorate are going. So I wanted to ask you this, like traditionally in our lifetimes, Dave, all we see is on the debate stages, whether they be like Republican or Democratic primaries or debate stages, it's candidates arguing over how pro-Israel they are. Do you think in 2028, we may well see already in 2028, that's only 2 years away, candidates literally arguing over who's less pro-Israel and who is for more cutting of aid than the other candidates? Do you think that's a reality?
I think that could happen in the Democratic primary, because if you look at the polls among Democratic voters, I mean, it's like, what's like 3% support the war, 7% want to support Israel. I mean, it's just from Israel's perspective, it is abysmal. And the fact that, that they didn't pay attention to that during the last election with Harris was a reason why she lost. And there's since been internal DNC stuff that has said that they knew Gaza, they took a beating because of her stance on Gaza. So I think, and I mean, that would be a real big change if we see that, a Democratic primary, whoever they're going to put up there. I mean, I guess Gavin Newsom, maybe AOC, which is very scary to think about. But I think we might see those types of things, saying, oh, we gotta, we can't help Israel do. It'll be probably very tame, but I think we are going to see that. And we're seeing at the Republican level in local elections, primaries and things like that, we're starting to see candidates who are openly against giving aid to Israel and critical of Israel. I think it's going to take a long time before that we see that in like the national elections and stuff. But, unless Thomas Massey runs for president,
and now we're talking, man. That would get me pretty excited. Not that I think that he could win, but what he could message, and he would get on all the big podcasts. But if he ran, I think that would actually disseminate our message so well. He's been so heroic on so many things. The Epstein scandal, the Iran war, the spending bills. It would be amazing. But I think it's interesting what you say about the Democrats. I think that's exactly right. One of Harris's biggest shortcomings was she just maintained essentially the status quo Biden view. He was called Genocide Joe, but there was no departure in her campaign from that. Did you see that Gavin Newsom, you brought him up, and I think right now it's like Polymarket, I think, has him favored to be the next U.S. president. It's not too unbelievable given what's happened. But he even, I think about a month ago, called Israel an apartheid state. Did you see this?
I did. He's already walked it back.
Oh, he walked it back, though?
Yeah, but he did say it, yeah. And he also was very critical of I mean, it's crazy that this is like a significant thing for an American politician to say, but he was critical of bombing the elementary school in Iran. He said that was bad.
I hate to even laugh at that, but it's so true. Like, that is horrifying that you'd have to be worried about you'd have to be worried about that. You said that this was wrong, that we bombed a school that cost something like 250 lives, and most of them like 8 to 10-year-old girls, right? It's just so insane.
Yeah, you would think that would have been just the biggest story, and that should have been enough to end the war. Just so horrific. But no, not in American politics, unfortunately.
Yeah, man. And they covered that up, and Trump lied about that. They said, hey, many countries have tomahawks. It's like, yeah, you never gave them to Iran. And the list of countries is like 3 countries long, and none of them were Iranian. So that was such a slap in the face to not only the American people, because you blatantly lied to their face, but also to service members that are in the region, people that you're trying to sell this war to. It's just so insane. Last thing, I lied. One more question, then we'll let you go. You talked about the Democrats. Do you think that this will happen in the Republican Party? If J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio, who most people think will be the front runners, get into a contest, will this be a focal point of an argument? Will J.D. Vance be more critical of Israel than Rubio, or is he just tied too much to the hip of Trump to even in the future go against this?
I think he might pay some lip service to the idea. It'd be like, oh, we got to have a conversation. We can have a conversation about Israel and But I don't see him really going that against the grain on it. And I also don't expect them to run against each other. I think it's going to be decided, who steps up. I would be surprised if we saw a Vance versus Rubio. I'm saying that now. I mean, a lot could happen in the next 3 years. I mean, who knows what's going to happen in the next few months with this war. So things could change, but I think they're staying pretty tight knit, this administration. So I would expect them. Vance is young. They'll tell him you could get the next one, and then they'll put up the neocon dream of Marco Rubio.
Yeah, I mean, and it seems like Vivek Ramaswamy, if he has ambitions, and I think he still does, to enter this race, he's kind of kept himself out of the limelight by running for Ohio. Do you think that might help him in 2028 when he can just take all the best positions and not be tied at the hip of an administration, so to speak? Even though he was supportive of Trump, he hasn't talked about national politics really at all.
Yeah, I kind of forgot all about him. So I don't know.
Okay.
Would he try to run again if it was, Vance or Rubio going up? I really have no idea.
Yeah, he's an Ohioan too, and I think he's very close friends with Vance, but it's hard to know. Well, I guess we'll see, Dave. Thanks so much for spending this hour here, man. It's always a pleasure to converse with you. Like, I really think that you are one of the most reliable sources on U.S. foreign policy of any independent actor on the internet. So go to antiwar.com right now. All of my audience, Liberty Vault, open up a new tab right now. Go to YouTube and subscribe to the antiwar.com podcast too, which Dave runs. Also, Dave, please plug whatever else you want to do. How can people support you and follow you?
Yeah, well, thanks so much, Dave, for all those nice things. And I really love your channel because there's so many shows and podcasts now that I never get a chance to watch, but I always see you covering kind of the important clips and stuff. So I appreciate that. And then my show, the podcast is called Anti-War News with Dave DeCamp. So subscribe to that on YouTube. And then all my writing is at antiwar.com. And you can follow me on X at DeCamp Dave.
Right on, Dave. Well, thanks so much. Thanks for the compliments as well. We'll have you back. I hope it continues to be a regular thing because my audience absolutely loves your work, loves our conversation. So let's do it again, and peace out, man. Take it easy.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks for watching Liberty Vault with Dave Benner. Be sure to like and subscribe to help fight the Mockingbird algorithm. Click the notification bell so you never miss an episode. And until next time,
no more war, no more debt, no more inflation,
No more empire.